our one of our representative officers for our I want to call it our mock association, because we are still not official recognized by the state, but we are working on getting that done. So Fede, I'm going to ask you to introduce our speaker today and turn it to you, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Our first presenter for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension's Lunch and Learn Home Garden Summer Series is Michael Potter. So Michael Potter is a county extension agent at Montgomery County, and he specializes in horticulture. He has authored various articles, including some topics like irrigation, mulching, lawn disease, turf grass, and many, many more, as a horticultural columnist for the Courier of Montgomery County. Without further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Michael Potter.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, one of the things I get to do a lot of here in Montgomery County is talk about turf grass. I wish I could get people to understand that we get enough rainfall up here and we do not need to use sprinklers, but unfortunately, they don't listen very well, or they just don't read the newspaper. So it's one of those things that we try in Extension to do a good job as far as providing, water management or water conservation issues, or at least ways to address, water conservation with a lot of our lawns and landscapes. So just kind of talk a little bit about, summer turf grasses, a little bit about myself. I was originally born and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas. So I know what it's like not to have a lot of rain. And then now I know what it's like to have a lot of rain. In fact, the last couple of rain events that came through here, I think at my house, which is about 40 minutes from where I work, we had basically y'all's annual rainfall in 7 days. So we had 24 inches of rainfall. So it's something that just, it's part of it. Down in Corpus, 25 to 28 inches of rainfall a year is what they normally get. But for y'all, we're going to kind of address some of the things and just kind of basic understanding about, what turf grasses go through, especially in the summer. The biggest thing is that in order to have a successful or a desirable turf grass, we need to select the appropriate turf grasses. We get a lot of people moving from out of state or even within the state, and they might have different turf grasses that do better. And, they may want a different turf grass that does better in one area and does not do well in our area. When we get people from out of state, they, start talking about these cool season grasses, tall fescue and all this other stuff. And it's just like anything. I've been in Laredo when it's 108, 110, 114 degrees when my son was playing baseball many times. So I understand what it's like to be down there and understand what, what y'all environment is. And definitely, these cool season grasses would not survive that. So, the way you look at it is at that chart on the left, on the chart right there, are warm season grasses. These are the types of grasses that we grow in our area. When it comes to selection, we Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, buffalo grass, centipede, seashore paspalum, St. Augustine's, and zoysia grasses. And within each of these different species of grasses, there's different varieties as well. And we have to take that into consideration because think about Bermuda grass. There's Bermuda grasses that, you have to mow at 1/2 inch. And then there are Bermuda grasses that you can let grow to about 3 inches. So they're, different variations. And even with the St. Augustine grasses, we have some that are dwarf type varieties that don't grow as fast. And you just kind of have to keep in mind, some of the common things that are associated with these grasses. When you have shade issues, when you have, 3-4 hours of shade, you want to choose a grass that's going to survive. You don't want a grass to falter. And so St. Augustine would be the best choice, especially for us, and especially for y'all as well, when you have shade issues. But being from Corpus, I know what trees that we do have down there, mesquites and other smaller trees and live oaks, etc. Here in the piney woods, of course, we have very large pines and we can have very, very dense shade problems. So St. Augustine is typically what we try to kind of be as our mainstay. There's a lot of different varieties that are out there. There's some newer varieties available. We're actually testing some right here at our office. One of them is called Cobalt. It is a dwarf variety of St. Augustine. When I went and picked up this turf grass from one of the growers down south of us, he said he didn't like it. And I said, why? And he said, it grows too slow. I'll have to triple my production in order to make it work. What he was, saying is it just grows so slow that he can't turn it over as fast. So he would have to triple his production in order to do that, which is a good thing because that means it uses a lot less water. It doesn't grow as fast, so its mowing requirements are less, and it just has some different benefits to it. But anyway, these are some of the most common ones that are out there. Floratam is really, really good for y'all's area. Problem with Floratam for us is we get a little bit colder, so it's not as cold tolerant type for us. But it's very leggy. It's a very opposite of a dwarf type variety. But it'd be a very good selection because it has documented root systems 14 to 16 inches deep. And we'll talk a little bit about here in a minute about how do you get that? How do you get those types of root systems? Like again, looking at some of the Bermudas, the hybrids, like golf course type turf grasses. Notice very thin blade. When you have thin bladed grasses, they're going to require full sunlight. They're not going to be able to withstand, a couple hours of shade. Sometimes they'll get very thin and leggy. So on that one side right there, common Bermuda grass tends to be a little bit more, I'd like to say, airy. It's not as dense versus a hybrid type, which can be quite dense. And there's a whole bunch of different varieties out there. Common, Celebration. Tifway 419 is actually coming off the market. It's not going to be sold anymore. And the reason for that, and it was a good grass, but the reason for that is because there's no 100% guaranteed Tifway 419 anymore. The genetics have changed over the years because of cross contamination and everything in fields. So there's no pure Tifway 419 anymore. One that I didn't add yet that we're looking at currently is one called Tif-Tuff. Right now it's showing to be very good in our area. One of the things I always talk about in a lot of our talks, and when I train our master gardeners and I do a presentation for the public and for the state, I talk about dormancy because we do have dormancy issues. How brown do you want it for how long? If you want a grass that maintains green as much as possible, then you would choose St. Augustine. Now there's pros and cons with all these different types of grasses, but most of your turf grasses go dormant during the wintertime because they're a warm season turf grass. They're not a cool season turf grass. So it just depends on what you want. Then there's the other option. There's fake grass. I'm a member of the Texas Turf Grass Association, and I'm also a certified professional turf manager. And before you ever do a presentation with those guys, they make you sign this little agreement that you will call it turf grass, not turf. Because they did surveys years ago and that stated, when you hear the word turf, what do you think of? And everybody said fake grass. So turf. So, it has its downsides as well. It's not as good as far as heat. You can see here's a study that was done up in Clemson and University in Arkansas. A 98-degree day, Bermuda grass temperature is 104, synthetic turf 165. Asphalt is 136. It's actually cooler than synthetic turf. Now they have made a little bit of improvements with some of those turf grasses, but still they're very, very hot. And they don't clean well because they have to be cleaned and they have to still be maintained anyway. Let Mother Nature do it. The biggest thing about turf grass is the maintenance components, the mowing, the watering, the fertilizing. I always call it the vicious cycle. You got to do a lot of it sometimes, especially when you get a lot of rainfall. In fact, in my case, every time I get to the point where I know I have to mow, it rains again and I'm backed up and, working or doing something else and I can't mow. So I have issues with mowing problems here. The first and foremost thing is you got to have sharp blades. You can see the difference right there between, on the left-hand side where a ripped blade is, caused by a dull blade, ripped blade of grass. You can see that it's opened up, it's shredded, and it doesn't mean a lot to most people, But when you really think about it, if you think about moisture loss in a plant, that left side has a lot of moisture loss. You got both sides of the tears that are losing moisture. You got the top part that's all jagged, it's losing moisture. It's much more, as far as its linear surface area, much more than what a sharp blade would do on that, like that right-hand side where it's a clean cut. So sharpening your blades is very, very important, especially with thinner blade grasses. If you have dull blades, sometimes it'll just lay it over rather than cut through it. So it's always good to sharpen your blades, 1 or 2 times at least a season, or a couple times a year, or at least replace those blades. I wish I had the picture of the blades I took off my my zero-turn mower after my son was mowing for about 2 months. The blades, I think, were about 2 inches shorter, and I don't even know how they cut. So it was one of those things where I said, "Did you sharpen the blades?" He looked at me and he said, "No, Dad, I did not." I was like, okay, I guess I didn't teach him well. So, but that cleaner blade cut is very important. That also reduces stress on that plant, regardless of whatever turf grass you're growing. The biggest thing with our turf grasses is that what we really like to see, especially with St. Augustine grasses, what we really would like to see is taller grass. And the reason why, the taller the grass, that means more root system has to be there in order to support that turf grass, to support those leaves. So that means a deeper root system or a larger root system. However, some of these turf grasses do not like to be mowed that way, especially some of your Bermuda grasses, especially common Bermuda grass. It likes about a 2.5 inch mowing. And after that, it starts getting leggy and it starts looking kind of funky. And sometimes St. Augustine will do the same thing. But what we do want, we really want those deep roots. With some of these grasses, you have to mow more frequently, especially with like Bermuda grass. You have to mow twice a week, almost 3 times a week. You don't want to ever cut off more than the 1/3 is what we really like to say. So here's a study that was done. Man, I don't know. Do you think this turf grass likes 1/2 inch of mowing versus 2 inches and 1.25 inches? There is a sweet spot to every lawn, so to speak. So you kind of have to play with it a little bit, and then once you find it, then you can really keep that grass growing. I used to do some baseball fields back in when I lived down in Corpus area. I was the field coordinator, and basically I was mow boy. But I'd spent a lot of time mowing on those fields and perfecting things, and our fields looked really good for a long time. When I got there, they didn't look as good. They didn't maintain them properly. They looked like the ones that are on the left and right hand side because they didn't mow it like they should have. So it's real important to mow frequently, especially with thin bladed grasses. You don't want those leaf blades to get leggy. And like I said earlier, it's the 1/3 rule. You don't want to mow off any more than 1/3 of that leaf blade at one time. If you do that, what you're doing is it's considered scalping, and you're cutting so much of that leaf blade off that you're actually damaging the grass, and you're not allowing it to capture the sunlight that it needs. I actually had a gentleman one time sent me a picture of some turf grass that he planted. It was Tifway 419, and he thought that he wasn't supposed to mow it until somebody told him to. And then he just decided one day he was going to mow it, but he mowed it at the same height that he mows all the rest of his lawn. And it was already very leggy and very high. And when he went and mowed, he cut off more than the 1/3 rule. So he cut off all the leaf blades. That grass laid over and died just because there was no leaf blade to help provide energy for that plant. So it's very important that you use that 1/3 rule. You can always, cut a little bit one week, one day, and then a couple days later, cut a little bit more down. And what you're doing is you're spurring growth from the bottom. You're just not scalping it all at one time, but you can gradually drop it down if you have to. So one of the things that I've looked into, and I always do every time I do some presentations, because I always want to talk about, water conservation efforts. There's a lot of stuff out there. When I was in Corpus, we used to talk about Xeriscape Corpus Christi. They had a big Xeriscape program there. There's all kinds of stuff out there nowadays. Texas Superstars, they're native plants, things like that to help you conserve moisture, conserve water. And all the studies that are being done, especially on turf grasses, they're moving in that direction. They're getting turf grasses that, like I said, are the more drought tolerant. They don't need all the water that some of these other things need, and they have the ability to recover. But you get into these points or get into these situations where you have drought contingency plans that you have to adhere to. We do it too. We do it in our area, even though we get 48 inches of annual rainfall average. We still have times, especially the last 2 years, where we were in a drought situation where we didn't get any rain, I think, from March all the way to, even in December or something like that. So we never got any rainfall to really help our plants and help our turf grasses. But when you get into these situations, you have to do the best you can. The only way to really help you guys and help you understand how to do this is to teach you, what happens, what is the science behind it. At some point in time, you got to think about it from a standpoint of thirst or thrive. And this is a picture up in Austin. They had a drought. They had contingency plans. They said, can't water. What you got? Well, you got an artist here that said, you know what? I'll make it colorful. I got you. So they did a polka dot lawn, which I think is pretty cool. But we do have to at a point in time change our view in the way we see this, because a lot of times people say, oh, we have a drought, all the grass is going to die. It's not necessarily that it dies. It actually goes dormant. And I'll show you a research study here in just a minute that'll prove that. But we do have to look at it from a standpoint of, when does grass start growing? We have to look at that from a water standpoint, and we have to look at it from a fertilization standpoint. Grass starts growing when the soil temperature actively 75 to 85 degrees. That's when the grass actively grows. So if I'm sitting here in February in my neck of the woods, and the soil temperatures are still in the 60s, is the grass growing? Well, no, it doesn't need fertilizer and it doesn't need water. It's dormant. So we have to look at it just depending on what area in the state you are, and you guys are a little bit different. We have about 26 weeks of growing season where our soil temperatures on average hit those targets. Y'all have about 30, 31, I think is what it is. And I'll show you a chart here in just a minute. So what are your expectations as far as a turf grass is concerned? Are you striving for perfection? You may want to go with the fake stuff. That I've seen those people. I deal with them all the time, where they get one blade of brown grass and they want to start over from the very beginning and resod everything. I mean, my job and our job in Extension is to say, okay, how did we get here? Were you watering appropriately? Were you overwatering? If I see certain weeds in a lawn, especially in our area, if I see certain weeds in a lawn, I can tell you whether you're overwatering or underwatering. I can tell you if you have too much shade because some of the weeds. I can tell you if you have compaction issues, with certain weeds. So that's our job, is to kind of hone those things, narrow it down so we can get you in the right direction, because we don't want that to happen to you again. We don't want you to have to spend unnecessary money, trying to correct these issues. But what we want is we want turf grasses to survive, even through these contingency plans, these drought contingency plans. We want it to get through that stress. We want to reduce stress as much as we can, but irrigation is a very important part of it. Turf grass needs 1 inch of water per week. Okay, that's prime growing conditions. When those temperatures are 75 to 85 degrees, it needs 1 inch of water per week. So it's about 0.623 gallons per square foot. Okay, so for 1,000 square feet, you would put out, for 1 inch, you would put out 623 gallons per 1,000 square feet. Now, how much to water? That depends on soil. Okay, depends on how well your soil holds moisture. One of the things I like to do, and you can see on the bottom, on that 31 weeks, down on the bottom, there's y'all's growing season. It's kind of 31-ish weeks plus or minus. When I have a chart that's called GreenCast that I look at, that is it shows all the soil temperatures and does like a 10-year average, a 5-year average, and what current average, currently they are, and things like that. So I look at it from that standpoint, and I look at what that growing season is. And if you can see, if I need 1 inch a week, there's virtually 4 weeks in a month, right? So you're 2.98, 2.88 inches shy in March. So you would have to apply some more unless you get rainfall that's spread out over time. And depending on the type of grass you have and the type of soil, some soils hold more moisture than others. Clay soils, which a lot of y'all have, I think down there y'all have some clay and some sand, some loamy type clays as well. But if you have sand is a difficult situation. You have to water more frequently. The key with St. Augustine and Bermuda and all these other grasses is water more, water less often. A lot of times I have people that are watering 3 and 4 times a week, and I'm thinking, why? You're creating a shallow root system. If you're only watering, you're watering a little amount every week, your turf grass roots are going to be right at the top portion, and they're going to stay there because they're happy. They don't want to go anywhere else because that's where the water is. So if we water deeply, that water gets down in the soil and those roots will chase it down. You want the soil to kind of dry out a little bit in between watering events. But here's, I think, probably, a good little spreadsheet. My lawn up here, keep in mind, I got 48 inches of rainfall up here. When I was in Corpus, I've never had an irrigation system, honestly, never had an irrigation system. I would measure out, and you can do an irrigation audit, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, and calculate, even with a fan sprayer or whatever else, you can calculate how much water you're actually putting out in a given period of time. And so, taking into account, how large your lawn is, that, chart that's off to the right, to the left-hand side with the red chart, landscape size is on the right-hand side. My lawn was about 4,000 square feet, front and back. And I would water 3 times a year in a normal year. In a drought year, I'd have to water more. But in a normal year, I was only putting out 7,500 gallons of water. When people who are watering 1 inch, and you can see on that right-hand side where it says growing season, only 26 weeks, I'm putting out 7,500 gallons. They're putting out almost 65,000 gallons of water, trying to get that 1 inch a week. And that's just, that's a lot of water. And think about it from a standpoint of not just one neighborhood. Think of 1 million people doing it. So water conservation is a big thing. And we're trying to address it from multiple components. Number one, you don't want to apply too much water because then you stress your grass out. Then it makes it more susceptible to insects and disease issues. Okay, but you're also wasting money too. So that's another thing that we have to address. But anyway, kind of a neat little chart to kind of look at and see how it works out. But you can see your average growing season right there. Actually, y'all's average when temperatures start to hit that 75 degrees is about mid to late March. I know we hit that temperature, ambient temperature, all the time. But the actual soil temperatures is what we're looking at, because we want to make sure it's at 75 degrees. So, you also have to look at it from a standpoint of fertilization, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. But, when you get September, October, you can tell that turf grass slows down. You're not having to mow as often, so it's starting to go in that dormancy mode. That also has to do with day length, your sunlight day length. So those grasses slow down. They don't use as much water. They don't use as much nutrients. So there's things to think about right there. So if you do deep, infrequent waterings, you will have a much more intrusive, adequate root system. If you do deep, frequent watering, then you're going to have a very kind of a sparse root system, because a lot of those roots are not going to want to be in wet conditions. So they don't want wet feet. So you'll have a thin root system. And then shallow and frequent. About 7 to 8 years ago, when we had a situation where March, April, May, we had it was like clockwork. 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch every week. It was just constant. And, it was just, and if sometimes it was, at 3 times or 4 times a week, it would just get these little showers and everything else. And I had a nursery guy come by or call me and say, hey, can you go look at these lawns with me? And we went out and looked at them, and I always take into account, the big picture. And I'm looking at all these rainfall events and going, yeah, I get this. I know what's happening. Shallow, frequent watering. That's what's happening. He goes, no, people aren't watering. I said, no, you don't understand. We're getting natural rainfall that's doing this 3 or 4 times, 5 times, 4 times a week. So you have a shallow root system. And what happened is that we had this for that period of time, and all of a sudden went dry and people's lawns started declining and dying. That's why. Those root systems were very high up. There was no moisture for them. There was no root system down deep in order for them to grab that moisture. Oops. Okay. So this is I've got a master gardener here in Montgomery County that brought me some. I moved away about 45 minutes away from my office, and we bought some land, and I built a house, and so it's new construction. And of course, I don't have any money. Extension agents don't have money. So he's bringing me these sprouts of St. Augustine because he knows I don't have money to go buy a whole bunch of pallets of grass and things like that. So this is Floratam. Look at that root system. I mean, from my tip of my middle finger to my thumb, that's 8 inches. That's a huge root. He was pulling stuff out and going, wow. And I was like, yeah, that's what I was telling you. I remember seeing pictures, 15 years ago of Floratam, and it's, by the way, Florida and Texas A&M developed that turf grass, where they had a piece of sod and those root systems were 14 to 16 inches deep. And so that's a very drought tolerant turf grass. That's what we want. We want to develop those root systems. We don't want these little short root systems that are, up on the top right there where my fingers are. We want that good, long, deep root system. That's what gives us that drought tolerance and helps that grass, survive for longer periods of time. So we have to, do whatever we can to maximize our irrigation. Many times, when I was in Corpus, I had a guy that was down the road from me on a corner lot. He would water until the gutters filled up. It went all the way down to my house, which was 4 houses down. I went down finally one day and I said, hey, man, I said, can I install a sump pump in the gutter? And he looked at me funny and he goes, what do you mean? I said, because I'm going to use your water bill instead of mine. And he looked down the street and I was like, all that water could water my yard. And he's like, oh man. And he knew what I did for a living. So I was kind of, trying to tease him a little bit too. And the next thing you know, we did an irrigation audit. But there's all kinds of equipment out there nowadays, controllers and everything that take environmental conditions into effect. If you have the ability to hook them up to Wi-Fi, we have some of those sensor type programs, controllers here at our office. I've got one at my house, and one of my best friends that lives a little south of me down in the Richmond area just got one, and he loves it. He's like, oh my gosh, man, I didn't realize how good this thing was. And it saves him money in a sense because he's not watering all the time. But even like that picture down below, I was driving home one afternoon, and sure enough, they're watering. This is winter time. The only thing that's green in that field right there is clover, and they're watering. Why? It's not utilizing any water. Why? So especially when you have real deep clay soils where it's hard to get water in it, meaning you start to water, let's say you water for 10 minutes and all of a sudden at 5 minutes it starts running off. That's because the pore space is so small and it loads up with that water. And so it's not going to allow much water in it until that water percolates through that soil column. So what you have to do is do a cycle soaking type procedure where you run it for 5 minutes, turn it off, let it water some other stations, and then come back and apply the rest of the amount of water later. Cycle soaking. It's a good way to address those kind of concerns. It's very important for you to know all the different, locations of all the different, if you have a sprinkler system, knowing what all the components do, your valve boxes and stuff like that. I have a buddy that's in Corpus that I used to do work with and do stuff for all the time, and he's a licensed irrigator. And when I was building my house, oh, you're gonna put an irrigation system in? I said, yeah, my wife's making me do it. It'll be the first time ever, since we've been married and everything. That's the first house that I'll ever have an irrigation system in. And he's like, well, I'll design it for you. I said, no. And he's like, why? I said, because I don't like how you irrigators design these things. Because a lot of times, these zones, to go and find your zone, sometimes you have to walk all the way around the backyard and it's over in this area and you can't find them. My mother-in-law had some rent houses and I used to have to go try to fix these leaks sometimes, and I never could find stuff. So in my situation, I addressed it. I put them all in a line where they're at least 3 feet apart from each other. So I know exactly where they are. So if I ever have a problem and I need to turn something off or replace something, I know exactly where it is. I don't have to call a company out and let them hunt and peck around until they finally find it, charging hours. So I know exactly where all the stations are, where the valves are and everything for it. So real important that you know that, learn that controller. A lot of times my mother-in-law was famous for letting the yard guy do her irrigation. Even though I did a complete irrigation audit, so I knew exactly how long it took to put an inch out, he would always come and change it. She would let him do it. And I finally, I put a big sign and I duct taped it where he wouldn't be able to get to it one day. It said, "Do not touch." And the funny thing is that when I did that, she started to notice that, oh, wow, my water bill wasn't as much. Yes, ma'am. So, there's ways to save water. These are some little rain gauges, little rain cups that you can get like on Amazon. They're a little square. I think made by Taylor, and there's a couple other companies that do it, but it's little, basically a 1.5 inch rain cup. Rain gauge is what it is. And you get yourself about 10 of these, and then you randomly place them out in a station. Let's say zone 1 is your lawn. So you would take those 10 cups and place them randomly in that station, and then turn on your sprinkler or your irrigation system for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes. You can also do this with your just regular fan sprayers or whatever type of irrigation you have, hose end or whatever it is. You can also do it that way to still say, okay, if I turn this thing on half blast, so to speak, about 50%, and I let it run for 20 minutes, how much water am I catching? So that way you can closely apply to what's needed. So you can kind of see there, this is a gentleman I worked with when I first moved up here in the Montgomery County, up around Conroe, and he was an engineer. So he gave me a nice big old spreadsheet, which was kind of cool, but he figured out exactly how much water and stuff. But what we did notice too is after he sent me the spreadsheet, I said, hey, we have some problems we need to address. Let me come out there and look. So what it was is some of those spray heads, especially the ones that are larger throw pivot type heads, we had to make some adjustments on the nozzling to catch. It was spraying 30 feet out and it wasn't doing anything in between. Yeah, you had overlap and you were getting some moisture, but we had to choke down some of those heads to where it sprayed more evenly. And let me tell you, they have so many different types of heads nowadays to help you with irrigation. So one of the coolest things I saw years ago, and I was like, wow, you know what? This really says it all. I wish more people understood this and knew this. San Antonio Water System did a study with Texas A&M and I think Texas Department of Agriculture, a couple of different agencies and everything were involved in this, a lot of water development boards especially. They did this big rain study. So basically what they would do is simulate a 60-day drought. And what San Antonio was trying to do was dictate exactly how many inches of soil you needed and what specific grass you needed. But it kind of changed the thought and theory on this because of what they learned. So if ever you look at that structure, if it was starting to rain, that structure would close up and not allow any water on it. Now, once they did that 60-day study, they turned the water back on. So you can see some of the, St. Augustine, you can see anywhere from 30 to 50% green on day 12, at day 12 after turning irrigation back on. And then, 80% was about day 32 and finally fully recovered at about day 78. Okay. And there's all the different varieties down at the bottom. And, some of the newer varieties probably would do better. So then you had zoysia grass, which takes a little bit longer to get up above that 80% and then also recovers about day 78. And zoysia is one of those ones that goes dormant when it gets hot and then dormant when it gets cold. So, but a lot of people say, oh, but it's more drought tolerant than St. Augustine. Well, if it goes dormant, of course it's going to be more drought tolerant because it's dormant. It's not utilizing any water. Do you want it green or do you want water? Do you want green or do you want brown? So when you look at Bermuda grass, totally different scenario. Bermuda grass comes back very quickly. in being, I've driven around, been around Laredo and everything else, and a lot of people have dirt lawns, just because it is dry, because you have, scenarios like this where you can't water and everything else, and prolonged periods of drought sometimes will cause issues. So it's real important, especially around the baseball fields my son used to play. But it gets hot. And when you get up above about 98 degrees, a lot of these turf grasses and everything start to shut down and decline even more so. So, wow, you turn the irrigation back on, and man, within 2.5 weeks, we're above 80% on a lot of our Bermuda grasses. It comes back very quickly. It recovers very quickly. And where there are wild hogs running everywhere, that's for darn sure. But you can see, and the way I teach our master gardeners up here and the public as well, I teach it greenest to brownest. So St. Augustine will stay green longer. You can see anywhere from 30 to 50% green. You can look at zoysia grass, 38% maybe, all the way down to almost brown. And then even Bermuda grass being around that, 30, 35% down to, almost completely brown. So kind of a good indicator of what the grasses do. They go dormant during drought situations and recover. Some just recover quickly. So that's the recuperative value. That's what we're looking at, especially with a lot of the research studies and everything they're doing with new varieties. It's very, very important to do soil tests when it comes to fertilization. That way you know exactly what fertilizer is needed for your lawn. It's $12. It'll save you a lot of money. Most of the publications that we have in Extension say put a 3-1-2 ratio, and given, Texas is a big state, but we need to know specifically what nutrients are needed. I have, in the 12 years that I've been here up here in Montgomery County, I have not seen a 3-1-2 ratio yet. Nothing close to it. So, which leads me to the next thing. I would love to find out actually what is our ratio in Montgomery County, because it's definitely not a 3-1-2. Sometimes it's a 1-3-3. So definitely have one done. That'll indicate some things. In our county, when homeowners do this, they come to me. We sit down one-on-one and talk about it and try to get them on a management plan, a fertilization plan. I always recommend every 2 to 3 years. When to fertilize, this is a big deal. Companies that are pushing their product will tell you it's time to feed your lawn. It's your lawn, feed it, and it's February. That may not be the best time to do it. In fact, it's typically not. When is the best time to do it? When the turf grass is actively growing. 75 to 85 degree soil temperatures. That's the best time to do it. And, for us, I always say tax day in late August, early September for the fall application. But you also have to take an effect too. Are you using a mulching mower? If you're using a mulching mower, you're recycling your clippings, and that reduces your fertilization because that's organic matter. Some areas of the state require iron. But because of very high pH soils, it's hard to get iron into the plant. It gets bound up in a clay soil. So you have to use chelated irons. So very, very important to do that to find out where we are. A lot of people want to do some type of renovation, tilling, top dressing, or aerification. The problem is typically it's done in the wrong time of the year or wrong time frame. We don't want to do it right before a stress. We don't want to do it when it's stressed or sick or damaged or unhealthy either. We want that grass to recover. We want it at its peak growing potential when we stress it out, because whether we do aeration or do a top dressing, we want it to fully recover. So the best times are kind of in those transition times before, we need at least 4 to 6 weeks of recovery after we do any kind of aerification or top dressing or whatever it may be, tilling even. Weeds, and like I said earlier, there's a lot of things that are indicators to me. Weeds are indicators to me. I love when people bring them in and say, well, how do I get rid of the weed? Stop watering. And they look at me like, what? No, I want to kill the weed. Yes, stop watering. It's because it's an aquatic weed. So you're overwatering, or it's an area that water sits, for a long period of time. So there's a lot of things that help us as extension agents. I have people bring me little pieces of leaf and put them on my desk and say, what is this? And I say leaf, because a lot of times you can't tell especially with leafy type, grassy type weeds, you can't tell what they are. We need a seed head. We need, either to key it out. Some of the extension agents have a little bit of range and pasture background. Luckily, I do too. And I can try to key things out or get it close, but the seed head is what really triggers us to figure out exactly what it is. And we have to take into account too, whenever we're treating weeds, we need to know, what their growth stage is. When do they start growing? There's cultural methods, mechanical methods, and chemical methods. Okay. The use of herbicides, and everything is a herbicide. Doesn't matter if it's organic or inorganic, it's a herbicide. So one of the biggest things sometimes is just avoiding it. If you're mowing properly, you'll never see it. I don't see any weeds in that lawn. Do you? Looks pretty good to me. That was my old house, by the way. And for 7.5 years, watering 3 times a year, no irrigation system. I did not fertilize. Sorry. I did treat for weeds 1 time, and this was towards the end right before we moved. So my lawn looks great. Oh, wait, there's a weed in it. We micromanage. Okay. That's a lot of times what we tend to do. And I always challenge my homeowners, especially when I do Saturday classes. I say, I tell you what, go mow your lawn, go inside, get cleaned up, take a shower, go get in your car, go drive around the block and drive by your house and see if you can see the weeds, because typically we can't. Now, there are some weeds that are problems, that are invasive type weeds and things like that we need to take care of. And the use of a herbicide is is a good tool to do that when they get real thick or start to choke the grass out. But there's also things that are indicators to tell us why that's happening. So we just need to make sure that, we're reading the labels, making sure that we're not burning the grass, we're not using weed and feed type products. Those weed and feed products, the time to fertilize and the time to put a pre-emergent down at 2 different times. So we have to be careful about those types of things. A lot of people say, I want to completely eradicate this weed. And I giggle because that ain't happening. Mother Nature's going to bring it back in some way, somehow, some shape or form. And sometimes it's weeds that may take multiple applications for multiple years, like sticker burrs. It's just going to take a while. So we have to look at that. We have to look at pre-emergence. Pre-emergence and applied at the right time will help control those weeds for the most part, but sometimes a pre and post kind of management will help tremendously. So some of the common pre-emergents out there, some of these handle kind of grassy and broadleaf weeds, and then some just handle kind of more on the broadleaf weed side. Just depends on what you have. A lot of time, like I said, if you're mowing properly and constantly, you're never letting, especially grassy seeds, and a lot of the broadleaf weeds, you're never letting them seed. They're not flowering. They're not doing what they're supposed to do to kind of rejuvenate themselves unless they spread by rhizomes or something else. So that's a passive way of good weed control. But here's why I always talk about soil temperatures. Some of the most common, 3 most common weeds, you can see what temperatures they germinate at. So, wow, when do we need to put that down? Oh, well, if we're going to put it down late January, early February, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to fertilize because the soil temperatures are at 55 degrees. I'm not supposed to fertilize till April, so why would I use a weed and feed? I'm going to put fertilizer down that's just going to sit there. That's a waste of money. And when you get rainfall, it's going to leach out. It's not going to be utilized by the plant. So the best thing to do is, if you're going to fertilize. If you're going to treat weeds. So also, read these labels. Had a gentleman that was in my neighborhood that put this product on his lawn and killed his 8,000 square foot lawn because this was for Bermuda grass. He had a St. Augustine grass lawn. So it's real important to read the label. Okay. Best management practices. So there's a lot of things that affect it, affect pre-emergence. rainfall, microbial activity, soil oxygen. So some of these have to be applied in 2 stages. I've seen it where over application of pre-emergence can be a problem like this. The grass is trying to recover, it's trying to grow and spread out, but you can see those root systems, they're all clubbed. They're not able to penetrate the soil because that pre-emergence there. So we have to be careful with the timing of the pre-emergent applications. So, if you're mowing properly, you're irrigating properly, you're fertilizing properly, then you should be okay. You should be able to not, you're not stressing your lawn out. So it's not going to be susceptible to those funguses. There's not going to be susceptible to those insects or weed invasions. If it's healthy, it's going to choke those things out. You're not going to control every single weed. That's just not Mother Nature. Monocultures are really not supposed to be, we're not supposed to have monocultures. Kind of like what I say about oak wilt. If we have nothing but oaks planted, especially Corpus, nothing but live oaks planted, and we get oak wilt, how many trees are you going to have? None, because everybody planted a live oak. So you have to have some diversity. But most of the time when we look at this part of it, we look at it from a pre and post emerge application and kind of a management plan for the future, because you can't get it all at one time unless you put concrete over the top of it. But then again, Bermuda grow out through the cracks. So some of the problem insects that we do have: fall armyworms, chinch bugs, sod web worms, just a couple of things. Most of the time, especially in our area, we get critters that come in and feed on them. So we have little spots where they dig up and stuff like that. So we know that we have them. Grubs is one that we typically see in the fall. If you're turfgrass, you've had some rain, or you've watered and it looks like it's got it's suffering from water, then it may be you have to kind of get in and start digging around and see if you have any grub worms. There are good products out there that are season-long products to help control them. Those are typically applied once you start to see the first couple of flights of the June beetles, the June bugs. Chinch bugs can be a big issue, especially in hot, dry areas of your lawn. I always say if you look at the adults, you'll find the Acme balm on their back, but there's all different little instars and as they grow and develop. But they really prefer those dry, hot, sunny areas where it's really dried out. And what you'll have is basically a dead patch. They can affect all the different grasses. They'll have a dead patch, but it'll be dead and then green. And a lot of people say, I've got a dead spot. I spilled something or whatever. What has to happen is that when you inspect for these insects, you have to check in the green area. That's where you have to check. And the old way to do that, they used to take just a hollowed out, tin coffee can and beat it in the ground and put some soapy water in it, and those insects would come up to the top. So the biggest thing is that they can get 3 to 6 generations. You can see some of the products there that are controlled. Make sure that you're reading that label, putting those products out, every couple of days or according to the label. If it says 7 to 10 days, you respray just to make sure that you're getting control over the different generations that are out there. The biggest thing, when getting through, summer and everything else, water appropriately. I know that y'all are going to be under water restrictions, so you can only water at certain times. Do that irrigation audit to help you apply the appropriate amount so you don't lose a lawn, but yet, it at least keeps it going to get you until the next rainfall. Some people fertilize. Like I said, I never did, just because if we have rainfall like we do here, we get nitrates naturally from the rain. And of course, you notice that, whenever you're watering from a faucet, that's water that we're made, that's made for us to drink. It's treated for that purpose. Well, chlorine is a plant growth inhibitor and root growth inhibitor. So you ever see that, you're watering and the grass really isn't growing, and all of a sudden it rains and that grass goes, whoo, happy. That's why. It's because it leached it, all that chlorine's in there. So, always think about it from a standpoint of, if that turf grass is dormant, we don't need to be watering it. It's only when, we start getting into those 75 to 85 degree temperatures in our soils that it needs the water or needs even fertilization. So timing is real important on a lot of these things, even with weed treatments. One good thing to do is always take good notes. My engineer buddy, he basically has a spreadsheet, and every time he's called me and asked me a question, or he does something in his lawn, he puts it down. And then sometimes after the fact, he'll call me up and say, hey, I did this and this point in time. And I'll say, no, wrong timing. For instance, he is it this one? Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah. So on 6/15 of 2016, he fertilized the lawn, applied too early, wait till September, October. So he's trying to apply it, in June. That's way too early. We don't want to apply fertilizers in the middle of the summer when the grass is stressed, okay, from heat and from probably lack of water. So important to do the things at the right time, take good notes and everything. And that way, like right now, I used to hear from him like once every other week. When I first started, I hear from him once every other year now. He has a good plan to help him manage his lawn specifically. Like I said, there's a lot of water conservation efforts being, done in and around the state. Some people have way too much water and don't know what to do with it, and some of you don't have enough. So it's important to address those concerns. Follow those guidelines, water appropriately, and hopefully you'll get through the summer with still a green lawn. So there you
Michael,
go.
thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
There any I didn't see any questions pop up,
Nope.
but in the participants, while we're kind of wrapping up, if there's questions, you can put them in the chat or in the QA.
Yep.
So this will be recording will be available. You'll figure out where, I'll let you all know where that is at. It'll be on our YouTube site later on, but it won't be up for a little bit. So we're probably going to wait until most of our sessions are finished, and we'll put them up collectively. So appreciate once again, Michael, for being with Mr. Potter, for being with us today, and look forward to getting to work with you in the future. Thank you, sir.
You got it, bud.
All right, y'all have a good one. And once again, final reminder, our next session will be released on June the 17th. Sometime that Monday, you'll get the link in the passcode. And then our session will be that Friday, June the 21st. Our topic is healthy soils for healthy plants with Extension Agent Brad Voss. And so we'll look forward to seeing you then. Y'all have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Have a good one, bub.